On proposition, we stand by the basic fundamental principle of criminal justice, that you ought not extract benefit out of a criminal act. And we think that they allow that. That you allow criminals to talk, ex-convicts to talk about their experience and how they, the terrible things to their victims, how they planned it, how they felt about it, doing it in a really grotesque or realistic, vivid way, and gathering fans and getting profit out of it. It is an assault on victims in a second way, but it is not just that the practical harm is there, it is that your experience, the capital that you gained from the criminal act, is being used to further your economic and social interest, is what society in a democratic and criminal justice system we cannot simply allow. I do not understand why they did not veto this. What is our model? Any act of benefiting from criminal activity should be prohibited. That is selling books, that is live stream social tipping, like round one, or TV's, paid, note, on the online application, website note, anything of that form. And we'll do it by the state, finding out these contents and ripping your profit away from these activities. Similar to how tax collection is done. It's the state officers that look into people's, activities and find issues, and same way they find criminals, ex-convicts getting benefit out of it, then you would go in and take away the profit. We would also allow people to report on it, so the states are assisted in getting that information. We think this is practical because ex-convicts are far less than people that can be taxed, which is pretty much the every population, and people know about ex-convicts, so reporting and the ability for the state to investigate these kind of things are pretty feasible. If there's no profit out of it, we're fine for that to happen, and we think that's good. Also, we think that doesn't mean that these criminals can do what ex-convicts can do whatever they want, because there would be different consequences of defamation, etc. if it's going too far. Two arguments, or three if I have time. Firstly, on the right, why the right to gain benefit from a crime is unacceptable. Secondly, how publicity happens and what's the harm of it. Thirdly, on what kind of publications happen in our rule. So, again, crime is an act that is socially unconscionable, and it has clear, vivid harm to third parties and deserves some sort of criminal sanction. The important point is, it's not just civil, it's criminal. It's legally defined, and society agrees that it's a totally unacceptable act that should be defined, that the state should actively intervene, aside from whether the victim agrees or not, and punish it. It is at that level that this act is clearly defined as unacceptable and should not be treated as good. With that assumption, the idea of profiting from that act in itself is against the purpose of what we agreed with and the notion of punishment. The structure of the exploitation of the victim, using the victim as a tool for your economic and social gain, is unacceptable. And that, regardless of how the publication happens, would exist, and whatever context they bring would apply. Punishment is about showing that there's no form of good in it, and it's a deprivation of interest from the criminal activity. The fact that you're able to benefit from the criminal activity and experience simply distorts the proportionality or the ability for the punishment to be executed. It denies the fact, our ability to say that there is no good in this act, and we must deny any profit out of it. That is why fraud, embezzlement, any sort of economic crime is not just punished, but you take away the benefit that you took out of those activities. And we find, for the extent of any form of crime where we're able to practically deprive these people of economic and social assets that they gained. And the important thing is that whatever benefit might exist, punishments are applied. Even if it's a hero, punishments are applied. So whatever benefit they talk about, social discussion, maybe something I can't imagine, I don't care. Punishments and the principle of justice do apply, because that is a fundamental engagement of how consequences of bad acts be executed, and those are independent and should be visited upon the people that have been convicted. And whatever benefit, if they don't deny this principle, they lose. It is against retribution, it is against returns, it is against rehabilitation, because these ex-convicts are benefiting from the criminal structure and simply laughing at the victims by the money that they gain from talking about how they ridiculed upon the experience and the dignity of the victim. Second argument, how does publicity happen and harm people? So we characterize that the publication happens in a way that is very harmful to victims and not in the social interest, and not like in the spaces. Why? It tends to be, first of all, descriptive, because that it's like gain more attention and people want to talk about that, to listen about that. It is likely to be provocative because that is the most controversial thing and gets the buzz out of the society and gets you more fans. It is that people enjoy antisocial content and that's the kind of fans they're able to gather. Thirdly, it tends to create fan groups. So through this proliferation of this content, they are able to create fan groups because of your unique characteristics that you are an ex-convict and continue to create interest structures that are based on your experience of a crime. And that is the point is that it is an echo chamber where you glorify criminal activity, enjoy the vilification of the victim, and talk about how it might be a meaningful thing. And in the worst case, talk about how you can do it the next time. It is that structure that is rooted on the fact that the profit structure exists and the criminals think that they can get away by getting money out of that criminal experience. And that happens because, unfortunately, criminals, after they come out of the jail, have little social connections and profits. If they have a profit, they are easy to jump to it. But more importantly, they are producers, publishers, or YouTubers who talk about crime, who want to employ or hire these people for their events or their live stream or YouTube video and have them talk about it. They can instruct how they can get money out of it and how to be provocative so that they go align in those structures of echo chambers of fans or vilifications of victims. Obviously, victims are triggered by it. It is direct second rape. They might say they don't have to listen about it. The fact that it buzzes on the social media, they attend in TVs or Abema, means that friends or SNS, they would have to be visited by people talking about it, and they will be reminded of experience. They have to imagine, even if they don't read the content, that this person is probably talking about my experience and probably talking about it in a terrible way, and that is exactly why second rape is the problem of second rape. And that is why we think that because of a likely structure of profit motive, it is likely to be an unacceptable structure, whatever they talk about. And why we think that it's the profit structures that we need to cut off. There will be other content that might come up, but it's not going to be a profit motive. It is for other motives that we are happy to welcome. It is benefit that is criminally unacceptable, but because of how dynamics of the dark profit motives exist, we firmly propose the motion.
Speaker call on the leader of the op to do a regular speech to hear.
My name is Tommy, and I'll do the other speech. And my gender pronouns he, him. I'll do the girl. The reason why offenders actually bring out the crimes is not only the individual faults, but also the environmental factors that is actually hindered by the lacking information or the accessibility of each individuals or the organizations that can actually have capacity to deal with those problems we oppose. So in my speech, I'll first make some response to the point. Second, I will introduce our arguments about the premise and the current war and the consequence and stuff like that. The first, moving on to the point about the responses. So they basically mention about the principles about how is being assault to the victims. However, we cannot completely kind of take this point as long as there's a fact that those kind of criminals actually brought out a crime and they cannot change the past even with kind of rehabilitations or kind of regrets and stuff like that. We think there's no visible differences in terms of what kind of because as long as victim will anyway have some kind of hatred, we think what extent that kind of differences actually happens, and that principle cannot be taken in this debate. So moving on to the point about our arguments. The first, I will refer to the premise in this debate. The first, we think that as long as it is this debate is about profiting from the publicity, we think that this kind of context will be relatively serious crimes, unlike shopliftings, or that cannot brings visualize victims damages or kind of detriments and stuff like that. So moving on to the point about the current world, the world actually looks like. We have several analyses. First is about the range in terms of information. In the current world, we think the accessibility of the information is limited to like the small range. For example, within the court or within the kind of like interested people, we think that it is only like limited in the like information in terms of stuff like that. For example, in juvenile crimes, there's no information given to the school, and there's no like explicit references to the like background of the crimes. We think that there will be no like further information to the consultings or the juvenile like support or stuff like that. Yes.
So, regardless of this publication, there will be investigative journalism discussing and investigating the tragedies and the background behind it. That is where you have objective, accurate assessment of the environment that caused the crime. Why is that the publication publicly?
Okay, I will explain it about in our third point about how the publish will actually work and its consequences. So moving on to the second point about it is about the disproportionate balance between the victims and offenders. We think in the current world where like the like emphasis on victims is actually leaning disproportionately based on A, about the emphases, and B is about the group of victims. For example, lobbying to the like some groups and making the like legislation stricter and stuff like that. The C is about the like medias that they are likely to like demonize such kind of offenders due to A, cost efficiency, and B, airtime, that those kind of like making sensationalizing such information is more like convenient for those like medias. And the implication here is that those kind of people who are likely to focus on like cruel aspects, and also those kind of like disproportionate balance will make like less consideration about the like offenders in this. That is why we say it is like a problem in this debate. So the implication here is that the environment are unlikely to be changed due to lacking supports, or for example neglecting or kind of arbitrary legislation and stuff like that. We think there is a problem in this debate. So second, I will move on to the point about how publicity actually like works in this debate. So firstly, the incentive about the people who actually publish those things is about like commercial incentives or the sense to like actually share the information with other people. So that being said, I will give some like analysis in this way. First is about like increase in like fundamental like increase in basic information. For example, parents can we can know the information about A, the background. For example, there'll be like more information about how parents have like neglected or actually raped those offenders in the past, or B, about how the way they actually bring out the crimes. C, how there's certain kind of like demand in the offenders and stuff like that. The second point is about the accuracy in terms of information, especially in media. Those kind of like actors are likely to like sensationalize those informations. There's like kind of like lacking accuracy in terms of information. Rather, on our side, if we like actually going to publish this kind of stuff, there's like many concerns. For example, in order to like pass the kind of checks if the like company actually they publish or stuff like that, we think that information that will rather be more explicit, and there'll be no limit in how much information they actually write. We think that those kind of depicting those informations can rather make the information accuracy, including the backgrounds or the way they actually bring up the crime. The C is about the layer who actually read those like publishments. A is about those who are like actually able or have capacity to pay for those things. As long as those people are paying for those publishments, those people have incentive to read those in a kind of understandable manner, rather on the like SNS or other people who are actually discussing about those things. As long as those people doesn't like really have to compensate for the cost of those things. And B is about those who are actually concerned in consulting or like juvenile care or stuff like that. Those people have incentive to improve or like actively opt into that information in order to like gain more like information from that goods. So next, I will move on to the delta in this debate. We have mainly 2 points to provide. First is about the changes in the practical aspect, that those kind of people are more likely to like opt into that information, and by utilizing those like kind of like past experiences, those kind of people can, for example, give more like tangible support for those people, or give some like support which is more like cannot be utilized in their paradigm. The second is about the social changes. In the current world, there's like basically like kind of like demonization of offenders. Rather, we have the offenders should have the right to go against this kind of demonization, and like, we can like make a counter narrative to this people. And even if it is not true, at least we can put more interest in offenders or like focus on the background. That is why we strongly oppose.
Thank you, speaker. Now call the deputy prime minister to deliver their speech in here.
The huge burden on their side, which is totally untouched, is to prove the necessity of the profiting or get monetization. And all the analysis from the radar opposition so far are nothing to do with that, right? Why they have to gain the profit and for that benefit, right? We are happy to publish the information or background of the criminal. We are happy to, if you want, we are happy to gain the sympathy or things like that. Where is the necessity of the monetization? And that is the reason why we think that all the opposition cases die on the road. I want to talk about two things in my speech. First of all, the practical aspect, why the dismotion is very good things to so decreasing the criminal action and things like that. But secondly, I want to talk about the principle comparison about CS. But before we move on to that substantive, let's move on to the extraneous rebut to what previous speaker has said. First of all, what they say is sometimes the criminal is caused by environmental factors, so we have to notify that. I have two responses to that. Firstly, of course, even on our side of the house, some media broadcast that kind of background about this that kind of things. As my partner already pointed out, in the case of the assassination of the principal Abe or single mother killing their children, the media have already published the information about their social situation or what kind of the background or reason exists behind that criminal action. I think that information about that background already exists. But secondly, as I already said in the introduction, publishing the information itself is okay even outside the house if they do not gain any profit out of it, right? What they have to prove is not just information is important, but that puts the necessity upon gaining the profit out of that criminal action. There is no reason for that. Secondly, they talk about the lack of sympathy about a two-day criminal. Okay, we haven't had any complete impact and problem from the lack of the sympathy to the criminal. We are happy to accept the role, hold a negative image upon the criminal action, things like that. I think the lack of sympathy is not problematic in the first place. So, moving on to the first substantive about the practical aspect about the criminals. Okay, what the leader of opposition has said, this kind of information is good because, I don't know, but someone lead the past experiences of that kind of criminal action, and they can, not easily integrated society or things like that. But again, there is that information itself is not mutually exclusive. That I think I don't see any necessity for the monetization. And also I think that we haven't seen any mechanism about that point, right? How the people digest that kind of information and how they improve the situation to begin with. But we think the vice versa. Conversely, we think that this, under their paradigm, the deterrence against the crime will massively decrease. I want to introduce a very intuitive analogy. For example, NJK YouTuber. What they are doing is that even if they do something bad, something immoral action, they can gain the kind of return out of it. So they are massively decrease the deterrence against the immoral and bad action. I think exactly the same structure might exist on their side of the house, right? Because even if some people commit a crime and they get a criminal record, some people might think, well, but after that I can publish the information and I can get a lot of money, and that will massively decrease the deterrence against crime. Of course, I don't think that many people suddenly change their mindset and commit a crime. But the problem is, if some people are already in poor or the edge of the innocence, maybe that kind of incentive will drive them to commit a crime for that kind of ippatsgyakuten or things like that. But notice, outside of the house, we can perfectly prevent that situation from happening, because even if some people, even if some people commit a crime, what they can get on outside of the house is a just criminal record, and nothing good, something beneficial for them doesn't exist on outside of the house, and that is massively, guarantee the deterrence or rehabilitation or retribution for the crime, and that is good. So I think that from the practical perspective, outside is better. Secondly, about the comparison of what we want to protect on the both sides of the house. What we want to protect is very, very clear. That is the victim and social order. I think that it doesn't take any genius to understand how their opposition paradigm is hellish for victim, right? Because ex-criminal who damage to you, who rape you, get a lot of money by splitting how they act in the criminal processes. Sometimes it makes victims so miserable, depressed, and the whole PTSD for them. I think the huge psychological harm awaits the victim on the other side of the house. They might say, well, victim will not watch that kind of information, but of course sometimes it's unexpectedly watch the TV, or YouTube or TV program, things like that. I think sometimes the victim hold a huge mental psychological damages, and that is bad things. And also, as social harm exists, as my partner already said, like spreading the information, hugely spreading the information about the criminal, or sometimes some people glorify that kind of criminal actions in any way. It's very harmful for the society, and that will lead to the worst social order on their side of the house. We want to prevent that on our side of the house, right? But on one side, what the opposition want to protect is nothing to do with this kind of motion. What they have said is, we want to notify the background. As I already said, that is not mutually exclusive. I think notification of the background or the reason behind the crime can be done even outside of the house. But even in the best case scenario of their side of the house, even if that kind of background is kind of mutually exclusive, and we cannot achieve that, still our side should be prioritized, because they have never explained about how that kind of knowing the background will improve the situation or solve the social problem. The beginning is they didn't explain about how people digest that information on the other side of the house, and how the social context or social background creates the criminal crimes. Suddenly will be changed. As my partner already said, some people will in the echo chamber and glorify the criminal action, but they have never explained to us. So some actor who suddenly gets the problem conscious and makes some action in order to solve the social problem creates the criminal. So I think what they are doing is just notifying the background, but there's gonna be no concrete benefits out of it. We don't see that. I cannot understand why they are prioritizing that kind of very just knowing the fact over the victim's psychological harm or the lack worst situation for the social order. For that reason, we think that giving the comparison about what we want to protect and what they want to protect, the government side should be prioritized. For those reasons, we are happy to propose.
Thank you, Speaker. Now let's call upon the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Here.
Two things in my speech. Firstly, about the principal justification, why that having that good consciousness and expressing the contents of the experience of the crime is necessary, fundamental right for a criminal, and not that this is an instrumental right. And this is my first argumentation. And secondly, about the practical consequences, about the proportionality of the criminal, and currently that why the currently protection of victims gone too far, and for the victim in terms of protection and proportionality of the protecting a criminal, it is necessarily no publications. So before that, simple rebuttal towards the fan groups. They said about fan groups mimic the crime, but it is not true. Firstly, these even if these fan groups create no incentive to mimic their crime, because these fan groups actually knows the length of the sentencing and how heavy if they mimic their action, right? Since they completely read the entire contents of the books. So that is why these fan groups have no incentive to commit crime even though they entertain. So that is why their public order argument is completely not true. And moving on to the principal justification. Why the criminal justice system should not intervene in that expression. Four things. Firstly, about what is the sake of the criminal justification? We say that sake of the purpose of the criminal justification and just limit the rights of the criminal regarding of the prevention of next crime and rehabilitation and isolation. Right? That is why the freedom of the criminal is restricted in the proportion of these these criteria. And secondly, the profit from the experiences are not instrumental rights. The first speak Pawa-san said about firstly that using the victim as a means is bad, and secondly about deprivation of property rights is just. But we think that is not true. Firstly, because people's action is closely connected to the people's mind, and because of the pre-perception that people have is closely connected to people's mind. Right? That is why each criminal's action, that is crime, is closely connected to the people's mind, and that is not separated from that actions and mind. Right? And secondly, environment, more specifically, personal environment and personal history and how to nurture that agent was closely connected, belonging to the people's mind. Right? That is why just rationalize these background or writing down these background is essential rights for the individual to rationalize their action, and just describing the action is involving in the fundamental rights of the human expression. Right? So that is why they as they said, this is not the property rights, right? So that is why people can earn the. So not only people can earn money, but people can publish their opinion is extremely important in order to justify in order to hold the identity of the people's mind. So we think that is beneficial. And secondly, thirdly, why profiting is essential attribute to holding to ensure the rights of expression. Two things. Firstly, because they say the journalistic inquiry exists. Two responses. Firstly, media have no incentive to make the accurate inquiry because media have profit seeker and cater to the victim's sentiment, and because that is more profitable. And secondly, because journalist is a third party and cannot describe the internal justification of mind, which is originated in the criminal, right? That is why no other third party's inquiry could describe the internal justices of the criminal's mind. And rather we say, thirdly, because commercial incentive is extremely important because exclusively through the commercial outlet like bookstore or internet platform or YouTube or Abema, the victim can spread telling your mind and telling the contents of the mind. Why telling is so important? So because we originally have our mind, but that is not the human condition, right? Human condition is just talking about talking and exchanging the information about the other person, and that is a society that more than 3 persons exist inside of the society. Right? That is why the criminal have a right to live inside of the society after inside of a jail and inside of a society. That is why we think ensuring the human the fundamental rights to live in the society as an agent to intercommunicate with others through the commercial outlet is extremely important. Yes.
I agree with everything you said, and which is why the right balance is to deprive profit because it's a challenge to the fundamental principle for criminal sanction. How do you engage with that?
Okay, so no monetization means actively silencing the crime at the first place. Firstly, that the risk of the backlash coming from the public perception are very huge, right? That is why the criminal have no incentive to write down any comment without any payment, right? So because the payment is only for positive motivation to describe the content of the crime, we think that depriving the payment reward is just silencing the criminal. And secondly, less likely to gain a decent job, right? So people have no extra money from the buying laptops or sparing lighting time or etc. Because the criminal are less likely to go to decent jobs. So that is why the payment reward from that article is essential money sources from criminal, and that is why that just depriving these opportunities is just not just silencing the crime, that just additionally depriving the right to earn money. Okay, that is why we say that depriving the money to earn from the article is just not just fundamental violation of the right of the expression. That is completely disproportionate. Okay, moving on to their second point. Proportionality between the victims. We say the victim already has huge power within the society. They can sue in the civil court and pay and require the reparation from that mental disorder. Right? That is why these victims already reparated inside of a society and already have huge proportionality of strong proportionality inside of a civil and criminal court. That is why that not prioritization of the victim is unjust in terms of proportionality. Oppose.
Speaker announce the deliberative speech here.
Opposition lose today's debate in two levels. Firstly, their benefit is quite low. They said offenders can be sympathized by the society. Then what is the actual benefit of that? Question is, what kind of actual tangible support they are going to get, or how they are able to, I don't know, maybe social integration, whatever. They do not really explain the mechanism of that. On the other hand, we already told you from the beginning that it's a double sanction on the victims who are already suffer from the loss of the family or trauma of sexual assault. They didn't really engage upon it. Secondly, even if conceding the benefit actually exists, they didn't justify or even tell you why this is a reason to not criminalize profiting from the publication in the first place. Maybe, for example, eco-terrorist attack on the corporation, maybe it's consequently beneficial to change the society or society making more eco-friendly. Smuggling illegal immigrants, sheltering the illegal immigrants, and hiding from police may be morally good, but it doesn't legalize the action in itself. They didn't really accept really a moral ground, the principal ground to justify as a criminal liability. I'll talk about two issues in my speech. Firstly, I'll talk about consequently how, what kind of benefit they are going to be brought to the criminals and why does this deserve to override the harm on the victims. And secondly, I'll talk about why it is simply unjust or should be criminal, the act should be criminalized. So firstly, on the benefits. So what they are actually saying is that it's quite essential for the criminal ex-convicts to be sympathized and getting support. I don't know what kind of support, but anyway, it's necessary. Now, Deputy Prime Minister already rebutted by saying that this is a job for the media and investigative journalism, and they have the incentive to do so. Why? Because of the background, or if there's some sort of reasonable background of the criminal to be crime, probably this is something that people, general public, are interested in, or have the room to sympathy. For example, Yamagami Tetsuya, assassinated Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, are kind of sympathized by general public because that kind of tragic story of their murders actually co-opted or exploited by the cult religion is something quite emotional and raw, therefore getting attention and sympathize. Think for example, the perpetrator of the Akihabara massacre happening in 2008, that these perpetrators suffer from the excessive tiger parenting of their mothers. That kind of story is extremely raw and emotional. That kind of story can get attention. That's why media have the incentive to investigate. And also, we understand the background of the victims also is sympathized and emotional. That's why media have the incentive to comprehensively broadcast that kind of thing and let society to understand that. So pragmatically, I don't understand why the publication from the criminal themselves is necessary for a more balanced understanding of the background. But even if conceding to that, the perspective of the criminal is so important, then they don't really compare the harms to the victims in the first place. We already told you from the Prime Minister that it is quite traumatic experience that those kind of background of crime to be blacked or maybe glorified from the perspective of the criminal society, right? The fact that these kind of things actually published or spread in the society, maybe the general public are enjoying a kind of antisocial act is quite traumatic. This ex-criminal actually bragging about sexual assault. Maybe it's cool about the gun shooting among the gang groups, which may be involved in innocent children dying, or how they enjoy the illicit drug trading, which involves the loss of the families or the loss of the actual humanitarian lives. Right? They really engage those kind of extremely human emotional harm on the victims, right? Who are already suffer from the PTSD, already suffer from a traumatic experience or flashback of actually what happened. So consequently, maybe conceptually there's some sort of benefit to the offenders, but it's quite intangible. But even if this actual benefit to the offender, they don't justify in the sense that this actually is at the cost, at the expense of the huge emotional damage to the victims. But even if this kind of a pragmatic consequence is something watched, why principally it's unjust? So Prime Minister already said that this allowing the profiting from the past criminal activity is simply unjust as considering the role of the punishment. The crime in itself is a societal and a collective blame for the particular action, and the punishment is a measurement to the blame. Therefore, we think that this allowing the benefit or allowing the ex-convicts getting the benefit out of the illegal act which should be blamed from the society or the collectively is simply disproportionate. Therefore, we don't buy the DA law's analysis as to proportionality, right? Assumption of the side of the house is that punishment plus benefit from the profiting from the crime is a proportionate punishment, right? But we don't think so, right? Punishment is a proportionate, and allowing the profit is actually reducing the punishment. This is disproportionate reward to the victim, so to the offenders. That's why it's simply unjust, and they really directly engage to the point. But I'll engage on their counter-analysis of the right of the expression and for the profit. Firstly, on the right of the expression, right? So, as Prime Minister already set up, this debate is about the prohibiting expression itself. This is about the prohibiting profiting from the expression. Therefore, this argument is not really relevant. But secondly, they didn't really explain why description of the crime in the past is a so essential interest of those kind of criminal in the first place, right? It's quite rhetorical to say that it's important to reflect, but I don't understand why they can reflect past behavior within their mind or just chatting each other, or maybe if they want to express, then just tweet or write on the free blog or whatever so forth. So I don't think it's important. And actually, the free speech right is not inalienable, fundamental right. It's restricted in many ways. Maybe public officers cannot express their political opinion in the public offices. Maybe hate speech is prohibited. Defamation sometimes prohibited in criminal ways. I understand this analogy doesn't really apply to this case, but what I want to say is that free speech right is not something inalienable and fundamental right to the extent that they exaggerate it. Also, on the right of the profit, once again, it's not inalienable right? So firstly, they didn't really engage the analogy of the government depriving the profit out of the fraud in the first place. This is already deprived. And also, the property right is something already compromised in many extent, right? People pay tax to the government. No matter how they make effort on getting the money, that kind of thing is prohibited, deprived in many instances. So we say that their counter-analysis is a quite general idea of the right actually existing, but they didn't really directly engage upon the fact that these ex-convicts do not deserve this extra right, given that the punishment should be the proportionate what they're actually done, what society should decide. Therefore, they cannot comprehend this principle as well. So overall, we say that their benefit is quite blur, and they didn't weigh the benefit harm. And if we concede, or if this, and also on the second level, they didn't actually comprehend the principle, complication of the clashes. Therefore, they lose.
Speaker, now let's call the opposition whip to deliver their speech. Here.
two ways in my speech. Firstly, about consequential outcome, and secondly, about principal outcome that is inherent rights of the expression. Firstly, about consequential rights. They said about two things. Firstly, about double sanction to the victims, and secondly, about the mimicking the crime. Firstly, about we clearly kick out the argument from washing the argument of the double sanction. So they say that two things. Firstly, that in terms of proportionality, because they say victims have huge potential power inside of society, and because they are innocent, they can freely lobbying to the politician to prolong the sentencing and make the strict sentencing, or etc. And secondly, these victims can easily recover their rights of the pain based on the civil court settlement, or etc. That is why, in the proportionality, the victims have huge power and huge opportunity for the expression in front of the media, and media have a huge incentive to attract catch these emotion of the victims, and these kind of basic disproportionality between the criminal and victim exists in the first place. So that is why they try to analyze that. So in emotionally unhappy, but we say in the consequences, we have to looking at the expressional consequences inside of these clashes. The criminal have no expressional consequences and no expressional opportunity to have to address their emotion at the first place. So inside of the jail, they have long time of the contemplation, and crime is the only things that they taught think in the long term, right? That is why the making the past action of crime, past expression of crime is a part of the identity that criminals have, right? So these criminals cannot express these experiences as a form of autobiography, and that is a crucial lack of the expressional consequences. That is why, in terms of this proportionality of expression, we say that crashes is clearly washed. And secondly, about mimicking a crime. We think that is absurd. So because why they never explain why these followers are likely to mimic the crime. Rather, we say these followers are likely to understand the rationality of the criminal and try to voice out for the criminal, right? So why is that so? Why the improvement is condition of crime criminal is likely? My partner clearly explained how the educator reads and how criminal justice works, etc. So giving an example, like Choekitaro YouTube channel actually provide the malnutrition problem within the inside of a jail, and these kind of actual problem are like easily changed because of the information uniquely coming from the criminal. So that's why in the practical outcome, less likelihood upon the mimicking the crime is not so important than it's a crucial likely scenario of changing the environment of the criminal. Lastly, about the consequence, inherent rights of the criminal. They say they try to argue this kind of proportionality is based on the consequential, but we don't think so. So two things. Firstly, because that lived experience of the criminal is lifelong matters as we stick to the romantic autobiography or etc. Since they their half of their life is occupied by the criminal because crime, because they are live in a jail and live as a criminal. That is why this is a huge identity that a criminal have, right? So that is why only profiting make it equitable for the criminal to express at the first place. So that is why the the rights of the expression is extremely important for the criminal, and that is inherent right of the criminal we oppose.
I'll ask two questions. Firstly, can justice tolerate profiting from crimes? Secondly, on societal impact, and does it override justice? So, we told you from the get-go that crime is a socially agreed, unconscionable act, and it is the interest of society to deprive any interest gained from it. And that was about the proportionality of the crime. It is about the fundamental purpose of punishment. It was also about the exploitation of victims. The point here is victims, which they engage with, is only one reason of why criminal sanctions ought to be treated that way. And it is the structure of the benefiting from an act that we think is unconscionable, not just at the civil level, but a criminal level is unacceptable. It is a framework that they did not engage with. But they had a couple of other things to say. So they first said, it's important that the right of these people are respected because it's part of their identity. Maybe. Why is it always true? They also didn't tell us why the right to expression is fundamental as engaged. And fundamentally, we asked, why is profit so important? Their response was, it was silence. Silence doesn't mean bad. You still can express. If you want to talk about it, feel about it, you can. They never talked about why profit, further continuation of benefiting from a negative or socially unacceptable behavior and capital and assets was acceptable. They also said, why not ban if it cares about for victims? Again, victims was only one of the reasons. Also, it's a balance. While their right to express is also important, and we can't really just generally blanketly say we should ban it. And why, at least we can agree that profiting from it is unacceptable, so we're going to take the first step to make justice appropriate. We can have a different debate for whether banning is appropriate or not, just that we agree and fundamentally believe that profiting out of that act is unacceptable, and that claim was irrelevant. Lastly, they said the victims have privilege. Maybe, but why does that mean that victims can continue to be exploited and be challenged of their traumatic experiences? That did not matter. Why fundamentally we believe that the principle of justice stands, and the point is that whatever they say in practicals, that doesn't deny the principle that criminal justice should prevail, and why they already cannot win the debate at the level. Secondly, also societal consequences. So they first said victims are, offenders are also victims and they should get support. Why is that important? What kind of benefit are they going to get? How does that materialize? And what's the impact? No explanation. Discussion in the media and information in general. Sure. What kind of information? How does it lead to societal discussion? What kind of legal changes, normative change happens? And then who gets benefit? No explanation. There really is no material impacting of the argument that they make, although I get what they want to say. Underground, maybe, but that doesn't deny the fact that if you ban it, it would decrease. The risk of victims being vilified by profit motive, the most grotesque and aggressive expressions will decrease, and that was only a mitigation. And we also had the harm simply to the victims, and we told you that it's uniquely more likely that these proliferate when there's profit motives associated to it, and there was not much response to that. So on the practical grounds where they haven't substantiated to reach the consequence, we already have. But let's ignore a substantive, but again, their best case is discussion, information, some change, some impact. There's like 3 or 4 layers that they had to substantiate to prove something that they could probably reach the importance of justice. So again, I question whether information, some say for a victim-like offender, without much substantiation, would it override justice? Would it override the demand for victims to keep silence when the profit motive distorts the way in which that experience is informed the public?